Before anyone reacted, and he was down. 3 men, 1 old vendor, and a street that suddenly forgot how to move. He wasn't fighting back anymore. He'd tried. The cart was already tipped. Tamales scattered across the pavement. One of the men had his collar now, lifting him half off the ground just to make a point. "I was maybe 20 feet away," said Carla Mendez, who'd worked that block for 11 years. "I remember thinking, somebody do something, but nobody did, including me." The dinner crowd was still out. Dozens of people, close enough to see everything. Not one of them stepped forward. Olvera Street, Los Angeles, October 23rd, 1972, a Tuesday evening, and this corner of the city had just decided, quietly and collectively, that this was not its problem. That's when she noticed him, standing at the far end of the street, small, still, watching. He wasn't running toward them, wasn't shouting, just watching, the way you watch something you've already decided about. He started walking, slow, no urgency, like the 3 men, the crowd, the screaming. None of it had changed his heart rate by a single beat. One of the men saw him coming and said something to the others. They laughed. Nobody in that crowd laughed, because something about the way this small, quiet man kept walking, unhurried, completely unbothered, felt wrong. Not dangerous, wrong. Wrong. Like they were the ones who should have been afraid. Nobody knew his name yet. They were about to. The man holding Danny's collar tightened his grip. Danny's feet were barely touching the ground now. His hands were grabbing at the man's wrist, not fighting, just trying to breathe. His cart was on its side behind him. 19 years of work, scattered across wet pavement. The second man kicked the cartwheel, hard, just to hear the sound. The third one was watching the crowd, arms crossed, daring someone to move. Nobody moved. A woman near the wall pulled her bag close and looked away. A man in a jacket took 1 step back. Then another. A teenager on a bike saw it and kept riding. The street had made its decision. Someone had sent these men here tonight specifically. That person was still watching. Nobody in the crowd knew it yet. Then the grip on Danny's collar got tighter. Danny made a sound, not a word, just air leaving a body that had no room left for it. His knees started to bend. His face was going dark at the edges. That's when the quiet man crossed the halfway point. He was close enough now that the man holding Danny could see his face clearly. He kept walking. The man with the grip said something sharp, a warning. 2 words, maybe 3. The quiet man didn't slow down. The leader of these 3 had run this same corner for 2 years, 40 collections. He had never once had someone walk toward him like this. Something about it was already wrong. He just hadn't admitted it yet. He stopped 4 feet away, looked at Danny, then at the man holding him. The street went quiet, not calm. Quiet. The way a room goes quiet before something breaks. He said something, low, just a few words, direct. No threat in his voice, but no question either. The kind of voice that has already decided and is simply informing the situation. Every witness heard him speak. Not one of them could repeat it exactly. Something about those words stayed locked in their heads, just out of reach. The leader, Marco Vega, 28, ex-boxer, the toughest man in every room he'd walked into for 15 years, looked at him for a long moment. Then he smiled. "Walk away," Marco said. "This is not your business." The quiet man didn't move, didn't blink, didn't adjust his weight. Marco stepped toward him. He didn't step back. Carla was still standing 20 feet away. She hadn't moved. She was watching the quiet man the way you watch someone do something you know you should have done first. The crowd held its breath. This was it. Everyone could feel it. The confrontation was 1 second away. Marco reached back and grabbed Danny's collar again, pulled the old man forward, put him between himself and the stranger. A wall, a shield, deliberate, practiced. Danny's knees shook. His hands grabbed at nothing. Marco watched the quiet man over Danny's shoulder, waiting. The crowd exhaled, not from relief, from confusion. The moment had arrived, and then hadn't. A parking attendant named Ramon Gutierrez was standing 30 feet away near the lot on Alameda. He said later that he reached for his radio, didn't press the button. He was watching the quiet man's hands. They were open, completely open, fingers loose, relaxed at his sides. He looked like a man waiting for a bus, Ramon said. That's what scared me. Not the other three. Him. Ramon couldn't explain why the open hands were the detail he kept coming back to. For years afterward, that image stayed with him more than anything else he saw that night. Then Danny's knees gave out completely. He dropped. Marco lost his grip. Yeah, just for a second, the geometry of everything collapsed. The crowd shifted, recalibrated, waited. What came next was not what anyone expected. Marco closed the distance fast. His right hand was already moving at trained speed, muscle memory, 2 years of semi-pro habit that doesn't disappear even when the career does. The crowd leaned forward. This was it. 20 people certain about what they were about to see. It didn't arrive. The quiet man simply wasn't where he'd been. Not a dodge, not a jump. He was there, and then he wasn't. Marco's momentum kept going forward with nothing to land on. All that force, all that certainty, carrying him straight into empty air. His balance broke. His feet went sideways. 1 step, 2 steps, stumbling. His brain was still sending the punch signal while his body had already arrived somewhere completely different. He spun, found his footing, turned back. His face had changed. Not afraid. Not yet. But something had shifted. A crack in the certainty. A first question mark where there had only ever been answers. The crowd didn't make a sound. Marco would sit in his kitchen that night trying to replay those 2 seconds. He couldn't do it. His memory kept going blank exactly at the moment his hand started moving, like something had been cut out of the film. Marco's second man was already moving from the left. Nobody in the crowd had tracked him. He came in from a blind angle. Fast, heavy, a forearm aimed straight at the quiet man's shoulder. It connected, hard, solid. The kind of contact that doesn't need to be precise to do damage. He said the quiet man went down on one knee. 1 full second. Carla stopped breathing. Ramon's hand finally pressed the radio button. Too late, too slow, but his hand did it on its own. A woman near the flower stall made a sound. Just air, just shock. The man on one knee didn't panic, didn't grab at anything. His hands were still open. He rose. One witness, a young woman who never gave her name to anyone, said she saw his face in that 1 second on the knee. She said he didn't look like someone who'd been hit. She said he looked like someone who had just been given information. What happened next lasted 11 seconds. Not a fight. Fights have exchanges, have moments where it could go either way, have suspense. This had none of that. Marco's second man went first. His own weight did the work. Momentum redirected. Our body following physics, it didn't choose. He sat down on the pavement hard and stayed there. Not unconscious, just done. Sitting on the ground with his hands behind him, staring at the air. Marco came again. Of course he did. Men like Marco don't stop. The identity doesn't allow it. He had no plan this time. Just forward. Just will. It ended with Marco's back against the wall. Not thrown. Placed. 1 flat palm. Light pressure at the collarbone. And Marco was against that wall. Not held there by force, held there by something his body couldn't argue with. His legs were working, his hands were working, but nothing was sending the instruction to move. The third man didn't move at all. He had watched, he had calculated differently than Marco had. 11 seconds, then silence. A dark sedan was parked on the corner, engine running. Hermas had been there before Marco arrived, at least 20 minutes before. Whoever was inside had watched every second of it. When it ended, the car sat still for a moment. Then it pulled away slowly. No one came to help Marco. No one came back. The silence after was different from the silence before. Different weight, different texture. Marco was still against the wall, his chest moving fast, his right hand, the one he'd protected for years, moved carefully, kept ready, hanging at his side like it didn't belong to him anymore. He was looking at the quiet man the way you look at something that doesn't fit in any category you have. The quiet man crouched next to Danny, put a hand on his arm. Steady, calm, said something directly into his ear. Low, private, meant for no one else. Danny nodded, once. Slow. His eyes were wet, but his hands had stopped shaking. Nobody heard what was said. Danny never repeated it. When someone asked him years later, he just said, "It wasn't about me." He smiled when he said it, like the answer was obvious, if you thought about it long enough. The quiet man stood up, looked at Marco once, not angry, not satisfied. Something harder to name than either, like he was confirming something he already knew before he crossed the street. Then he reached down and picked up a tamale from the pavement, set it on the edge of the overturned cart, carefully, like it mattered. Then he walked away. Same direction he'd come from, same pace, same unhurried, unbothered movement, like nothing that had just happened had cost him a single thing. Nobody followed him, nobody called out. He turned the corner and was gone. Yes, and the crowd stood there, 30 people, and slowly realized they didn't even know his name. That's when Carla finally moved. She crossed the street, fast now, the paralysis gone. She crouched next to Danny, put her hands on his arms, looked at his face. His collar was torn. One side of his jaw was starting to swell. "You okay?" she said. He nodded. His eyes were still on the corner where the man had disappeared. "Who was that?" Danny asked. Carla didn't answer. She didn't know, and something about the question felt like it deserved more than a name. Carla had stood 20 feet away and not moved. She'd watched a stranger cross a street she couldn't make herself cross. That distance, 20 feet of pavement, would sit with her for a long time. Ramon was on his radio now, giving a description. He kept stopping because he wasn't sure what details were useful and which ones just sounded strange. The open hands, the pace, the tamale. How do you put that in a report? Marco's second man was still sitting on the pavement, one hand behind him for balance, looking at the space in front of him like the answers were somewhere in the air. The third man was gone. Nobody saw him leave. Marco pushed himself off the wall. He stood there for a moment, just stood. His legs were working. His hands were working. But something else had stopped. He straightened his jacket slowly, the way a man straightens his jacket when he needs a second to find himself again. He looked at the corner where the quiet man had disappeared, held it for a long moment. His second man was still on the ground, not hurt badly, just unable to explain to his body why it should get up yet. Marco didn't look at him. He looked at Danny. The old man was sitting on the pavement now, Carla's hands on his arms, his torn collar hanging open. Danny wasn't looking at Marco. Danny was looking at the corner too. Two men, looking at the same empty corner, for completely different reasons. Marco turned up his collar against the night air and walked away in the other direction. Nobody stopped him. Nobody called out. The crowd just watched him go. Now here is what nobody in that crowd knew about Carla Mendez. She wasn't just a flower vendor who'd worked the block 11 years. She was Danny's daughter-in-law. She had married his son 7 years earlier. Sunday dinners every week. She knew how he took his coffee. She knew he repainted the cart himself. And she had begged him, quietly, carefully, more times than she could count, to move the cart to a safer block. He always said the same thing. "This is my corner." She was there that Tuesday evening specifically to try one more time. She had closed her stall early, walked over. She was going to say, "Papa, please, just this once, just listen." She was 20 feet away when the cart went over, and she stood there. "I tell myself it was shock," she said years later. "But I don't know if that's honest. I think I just didn't know what to do. And I keep thinking about how that's different. Shock is something that happens to you, not knowing what to do. That's something you carry." She watched a stranger cross that street without hesitation, without calculation. She had calculated. The math had stopped her cold. He hadn't calculated at all. Yet the open hands. Carla thought about them too. A man walking into something dangerous with his hands open. Not because he wasn't ready, because he didn't need to be afraid to be ready. The dark sedan was gone. Ramon noticed the empty spot on the corner while he was still on the radio. He told the voice on the other end. Then he said, "The car was there before the men arrived, 20 minutes before," which meant someone had known, had come to watch. Marco would look for that car the next day. It wasn't there. No call came from the crew. No one checked on him. The people he had spent 3 years making himself useful to, collecting for, intimidating for, showing up for, had watched him go down in 11 seconds and driven away. He sat on that pavement alone and started doing arithmetic he had never done before. Whoever was in that car never came forward. Nobody tracked the plate. But the crew stopped sending anyone to Olvera Street after that. Danny's corner stayed his, not because of what had been done to Marco, but because word travels fast about the kind of man who crosses a street like that. Marco went home that night without speaking to anyone. He sat in his kitchen, light above the stove on, everything else dark. He kept replaying it, not the 11 seconds, the moment before, the moment when the quiet man stopped 4 feet in front of him and said those few words. And Marco felt something he hadn't felt since he was a teenager. Small, not because of size, not because of strength. Yeah, because something in those 4 feet of space between them had looked straight through everything Marco had spent 15 years building and hadn't been impressed by any of it. 40 collections, always clean. He had never miscalculated. This time he had. And the part that kept him up wasn't losing. It was that he didn't understand what he had lost too. He didn't sleep that night. He kept thinking about the open hands. What kind of man walks toward 3 people with his hands open like that? The answer came around 3 a.m. Quiet, unwelcome, a man who isn't afraid, not brave, not crazy, just genuinely, completely without fear. In a way Marco had never seen and didn't have a word for. He thought about his father, the restaurant, the boxes. His father hadn't been weak. And that he just hadn't known what to do with a world that doesn't respond to fairness. Marco had decided the answer was force. Hit first. Make the cost too high for anyone to challenge. He'd been wrong. Not because force doesn't work. He'd been wrong because he'd confused making people afraid with making them respect him. The open hands meant something specific. A man whose hands are never a threat, because he never needs them to be. Marco turned that over in his mind for a long time before he understood it. When he did, it changed the way he taught everything that came after. Whatever words the quiet man had said, 4 feet away, low voice, no threat, Marco never repeated them to anyone either. Not because he'd forgotten, because they were the most honest thing anyone had ever said to him, and some things you keep. It had the story spread the way stories spread on Olvera Street. By Thursday, Ramon was telling it with 6 men. By the weekend, someone had added a weapon. By Monday, 3 people knew the quiet man's name. By Tuesday, 1 week after it happened, everyone on that block knew. And knowing the name changed how they remembered it. Because now they were asking themselves, had they somehow known, even then, before they knew? The answer most of them settled on was, yes. Something about the walk, the pace, the hands, something that didn't need a name to announce itself. Danny reopened his cart Wednesday morning. Same corner, same time. His collar was mended. His jaw had faded from purple to yellow. His hands were steady. Someone from the crew came by on Friday. Stood on the corner, looked at the cart, walked away. Nobody came back. The young woman who said he looked like someone receiving information, she came back to the block 2 weeks later. She stood at the corner for a few minutes. She didn't tell anyone why. She bought a tamale from Danny, ate it standing up, and left. Danny said she looked like she was checking something off a list. 3 months later, Marco stopped collecting. No announcement, no confrontation. He just stopped showing up. When the crew sent someone to ask why, Marco said he was done. The way he said it ended the conversation before it started. He got a job with a freight company, early mornings, loading, honest physical work that left him tired in a different way, a way he hadn't felt before, a way that felt clean. He went back to the gym, not to train for anything specific, just to move, to hit the bag. Yeah, to be inside his body without needing anyone to be afraid of him. His right hand still ached in cold weather. He started teaching kids from his block, unpaid, informal, after school, whenever they showed up, basic boxing, how to breathe, how to stand, how to stay calm when something is coming at you fast. The strongest position, he told them, more than once in different ways, isn't the one that scares the most people. It's the one that doesn't need to. He never told them where that came from. He didn't need to explain it. It was just true, and true things stand on their own. Danny was asked about those words one last time in 1981. Same answer. It wasn't about me. Then he smiled. The journalist who asked didn't use the quote. It didn't fit the piece, but the journalist thought about it on the drive home. And for several days after. Carla took over Danny's cart in 1975, not because he couldn't work, because he asked her to. She said yes before he finished asking. She moved it 2 blocks. Better light, more foot traffic. Danny came by most evenings, sat in his folding chair, talked to the regulars, drank a toll when it got cold. She never forgot that Tuesday, the 20 feet she didn't cross, the stranger who crossed it without breaking pace. I used to think courage was something you either had or you didn't, she said. Now I think it's a decision you make before fear shows up, so that when fear arrives, the decision is already done, and your feet just follow. She wasn't sure if that was her idea or something she absorbed from watching 11 Seconds on a Tuesday evening in October 1972. She supposed it didn't matter where it came from. What mattered was that she carried it. There is a version of this story where it ends with the 11 seconds, where the fight is the point and everything else is detail. But the people who were there, Danny, Carla, Ramon, even Marco, none of them remember the fight as the part that stayed. What stayed was the walk, one man, moving across a street everyone else had decided was not their problem. Not faster, not slower, not dramatic, just moving. Like the decision had already been made so long ago, it wasn't even a decision anymore. What stayed was the hands, open, loose, unhurried. What stayed was the tamale, picked up from the pavement and set on the edge of the cart. Not a statement, not a gesture for the crowd, just returning something to where it belonged. Yes, Bruce Lee was 31 years old that October. He was on his way back to his car. He had a meeting the next morning. He had a life that was becoming something enormous, but he moved through it the same way he moved through everything, without letting the size of it change his pace. He never mentioned that evening. He wasn't there for the story. He was there because a cart went over and an old man needed someone to cross a street. Marco Vega spent years being the man nobody stopped. It took 11 seconds, and one stranger who wasn't even supposed to be there, to show him what he had been missing the whole time. Not force, not fear, just a man with open hands walking towards something every single person around him had already decided to walk away from.